Okay, welcome to the August 22nd Board of Education meeting. The board has been in closed session since 6:30 for 3 items: collective negotiation matters between the public body and its employees or their representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees. Approval of March 21st, July 18th, and August 8th, 2017 closed session minutes. And the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body. Could you rise for the pledge? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comments is next. The board will receive public comments for up to 3 minutes. And we don't respond at this meeting, but we will respond at a later time. Are there any public comments tonight? Hearing none, we'll move to approval of board meeting minutes. There are 4 sets of meeting minutes for open session. Are there any comments from the board members? Okay. Minutes will stand as presented. Reports and presentations. We're utilizing social media to tell the district's story. John Hickman. Thanks.
We have it. It's on. You can hear me? Fantastic. Thank you. We've got it up. Okay. Well, as you said, my name is John Hickman. I have a company called My School Grid, and Dr. Moyer asked me to come and give you a little background on some of the stuff that the school district's been working on this summer, and also why using social media is an important tool in school communications. I'm happy to tell you that I have condensed my normal 245 slide presentation down to a short hour and a half. I swear I'll keep you engaged, and I guess I'll stick to the 15 minutes that Dr. Morgan gave me this evening. So why is social media important, and why use social media? And you'll see as we go through this that each of these are really important. First of all, it's cost effective. These platforms are free for you to use and incredibly inexpensive for purchasing ads if you choose to target certain demographics. It is intensely personal, and I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. It is immediate in how you're able to reach folks. It can be very persuasive. It is flexible in how you use it. And you'll also see why this is important. It is visual using pictures and video, and it's very engaging. So why does it work? Pew Research, I believe is the name of the company, that does a poll every year and asks people, what is the most influential person for you? And they ask about everything: journalists, congresspeople, clergy, everything that you can think of. The answer that always ranks the highest every year is the phrase, people like me. Said another way, send a Frenchman to speak to the French, right? Social media is a digital representation of real-life relationships that exist in the world. So when you start interacting with social media, you're going to be interacting with people inherently like you. Also, another key thing is the vast majority of people only establish digital relationships with people they either respect or they like, and most of these relationships started when you were a child. A lot of people think it's only the young folks on social media. The reality is the fastest growing group joining Facebook today is over 55 years of age. So it's not just for kids. How does it work? And I'm going to need a little help. So if I could get the folks on this side of the room to watch the reaction of the face on the people on this side of the room, and if I could get everybody on this side of the room to watch the reaction on the face of the people on the other side of the room when I tell you who the guy sitting in the chair is. Okay? So this was a picture taken on the last day of school in the Bourbonnais School District, which is a school district just south of here, south end, sort of past the south suburb of Chicago. It was posted online on the last day of school. What I want you to know is all the kids standing in line have something in their hand. It's their yearbook. And they're waiting for the person in the chair to sign their yearbook. Has anybody seen this picture before? Okay. The guy sitting in the chair is the janitor. Tell me what you know about the culture at that school. I mean, this is a school that I want my kid to go to. If the kids are so engaged with the janitor that they're willing to not go play on the playground and hold their yearbook and stand outside in line for that long, that tells me that something's going really well in that school. It's difficult to tell that story in an email newsletter. It's difficult to tell that story on a website. That kind of story gets told on social media like this. That picture got posted as they walked out the door on the last day of school. That night, it started to trend on Reddit because everybody was liking and sharing it. WGN saw that it was trending on Reddit and ran a story on it the next morning. The following morning, that was a front page story on MTV.com, and Fox and Friends broadcast live from the parking lot. The following morning, that picture was featured on the Today Show. It was featured on Good Morning America. It was also on the front page of Yahoo.com and AOL.com. That doesn't happen on a website, and that doesn't happen in an email newsletter or a paper newsletter that goes home, or even an email that gets sent out, although it's a little bit easier on email. So why did that happen? How many of you remember the email that went around in the early 90s, the dancing baby? Do you ever remember the Ooga Chukka baby? Did you from Ally McBeal? You remember? Anybody know what? It clogged up. IT guys know about it because it clogged up email servers. A little video of a baby in a diaper, an animated baby dancing to the Ooga Chukka song. Anyway, when that occurred, they started doing a lot of research. These are fairly well documented. But there's 5 essential elements that are required for something to go viral or to create buzz. First of all, it has to be a worthy cause. Second of all, it has to be visual. Remember I said social media was visual, using pictures and video. It needs to be visual. Third, you have to segment the audience, so you have to know who you're going to talk to. And then you have to speak to them in a way that causes them to evoke emotion. By the way, this is one of the reasons that I think school districts were somewhat averse to using social media, because in the school district, in the education community, you're trying to get people to lower the emotion so that they get into their thinking, rational learning brain. To be successful on social media, you need to elevate emotion. And so there's some cultural things that are a little bit different. The trick is with the school district is do that in a way that elevates and causes positive emotions to be evoked. And then the final thing, and this is the piece that a lot of people miss, is you got to make it easy for people to help you. Either share the content or do what it is that you're asking them to do. So on my opening slide, I had 3 points: connect, engage, and activate. And so when you're looking at connecting it with folks, you got to think about all the tools that are in your communications toolbox. Social media is not a panacea, so you can't just do social media and ignore everything else. You have to know the role that social media plays in what it is that and how it is that you're wanting to communicate, and so see it as a leg on a stool. Social media, email, and even direct mail, I sort of see them as a food truck. It goes to where the people are. So you get kind of a limited menu. It's very specific and things like that, and there's limited service that comes with it, but it comes to you and it's more convenient. The website, a newsletter, or even an e-newsletter is more like a restaurant. And so you're going there, you're getting more service, there's more detailed information, deeper level of service, a much bigger menu of things that you can get. The trick is you don't always want to eat at a food truck, but if you're really hungry and you can't get to a restaurant, it's kind of nice when a food truck shows up on occasion. So you don't ignore one or the other, it's just you use them both as the way that they're most effective at solving your problem. A lot of discussion goes on about which platform to use. On the left-hand side is and I know you can't read that. On the left-hand side are all the social media networks in the world that are sort of in the top 10 or 15. On the right-hand side, I've boiled down the ones that are in the United States, that are U.S. controlled. Facebook, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and Instagram are all owned by Facebook. Tumblr is independent. Twitter is independent. And so you can see how all those play out. So as you look at which social network we want to use for communicating and to whom we want to use them, that gives you a good breakdown of the size of these. Now, these are worldwide users. I looked, and there are apparently 54,000 users, active monthly users in Facebook in Elmhurst. What I found interesting about that is there's only 46,000 residents. And my guess is that's explained by a couple of things. I don't know how far down the census population goes in age, if it counts everybody. But the second part of it is if somebody's moved out of Elmhurst, so like somebody goes off to college and they still list Elmhurst on Facebook, even though it'll sort of count that. But what I can tell you is a huge percentage of your population is on social media platforms. I would guess you're pressing 90% probably. I can tell you nationwide, we find about an average of somewhere between 75 and 80% of registered voters are on social media now. So the other part that's important about, and I'm just going to touch on this, the other part that's important about connecting with people is understanding, having statistically reliable public opinion research. And we typically work with whatever firm the school district works with in understanding that. But it's important to understand where your community is as a whole with the issues that are facing it. So the second step is, once you've connected with your folks, is to engage these folks. So in other words, we want them interacting with our content. We want part of their brain helping us think about and telling us, giving us feedback about what's going on and how they're perceiving what we're doing. So one of the ways that this summer we've worked with is sharing the good news. You guys have a lot of good stuff going on in your school district. You're one of the top school districts in the state. You had a group that was it the top coders in the country? And then you had the story about the 4 national merit finalists. Now, I know you can't see the numbers, but this post was seen by over 4,000 people. That post was seen by, did I cut off the number? 5,000 people. And that one was almost 1,000 folks. So you see how as stories are appealing to people, they're liking, commenting, sharing the content, which causes it to feed into the algorithms of the social media platforms, which causes it to go viral. Social media is also really good. One of the other things that we focused on is sharing the why behind things, or what's going on. I know as not only come at this from the view of having worked with a lot of school districts on implementing social media, but I'm also the dad of a 9.5-year-old. So I sort of see this from a couple of different perspectives. I know as a parent, I always wonder, well, why are they doing that? I'm not an education expert, so I don't know this stuff. But you can use social media to tell the story, not ambiguously, but of specific people in specific classrooms, of what it is that they're doing. And so one of the things that we did this summer was talked about all the work that the teachers were doing in professional development and the university that you had and things like that were happening over the summer, and adding math teachers so that you could address test score issues and things like that down the road. So you can use this as a strategic communications tool to help inform folks about what's going on and why you're doing certain things in the school district. This is the humbling part of social media, and that is that you have to have the courage to let data drive the bus. Invariably, we'll sit down and brainstorm, okay, here's a plan and here's what we think is going to work, and you lay it all out, and then you let the analytics start bubbling in on the social media platforms, and all of a sudden you find out how really unsmart you can be sometimes. There was a school district that I worked with that we had survey data, and everything said that technology in the classroom was really important to their community. We started putting information about technology on and nobody interacted with it. It was like, okay, fine. So we change course and we start working on other content to put on social media platforms. But the trick is you get good feedback about everything that you're posting. I know that this summer we doubled the posts quantities that were going up, and I was looking earlier, and you've basically doubled the number of people that you've reached over the summertime on social media platforms, just because by increasing the frequency and improving the time you were putting up the content, and then people started to interact with it and liked it. So the trick here is that you guys need to know is let the feedback from your users drive where you take things and what you do on social media. And then the final step is to activate. This is a picture of a school district that I worked with in Iowa City. There's a whole lot of backstory behind this, so I'm not going to take credit. But they were having trouble getting people to show up to community engagement meetings, and everything was right. They were doing everything right, and they couldn't figure out why people weren't showing up. And so they called me and said, hey, will you help us a little bit with this? And yeah, sure. So we ran some stuff on social media, and at the next meeting, 400 people showed up. Now, they had to do, about a year and a half worth of work in laying the groundwork for that meeting. So the social media was not the trick. The trick was the year and a half of work they did. All I got to do was throw the match on the fire. They had built it and poured gas on it and done all of that. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is it that you want to achieve with your strategic communications program? Because it needs to be strategic. It needs to be communications with purpose. And so in activating, these are just some of the issues that have bubbled to the top in the discussions that I've had with folks through the summer of things that you want to achieve. You want to get people at your community engagement meetings. You have facilities needs that the community needs to know about. You're in Illinois. I think I saw the ad on, is it SB1 is the bill? I think I saw that no less than 10 times when I was from the airport to here as I was getting into the hotel and setting up and stuff. So clearly that's something that the community needs to be aware of. The other thing that you're working on that I think your community is going to be really interested to hear about is not only the excellent results that you're getting, but what you're doing to drive academic results and excellence even higher. And I think you've got is it Ignite D205 is the initiative that you've got going on. So this is a way to help the community understand, here's where changes are coming, here's where you can expect them, here's why you can expect them, and so that people aren't blindsided by stuff, but you can just, you can use social media as just one more tool to get that information out there strategically to them. So when you embark on social media for the first time in a school district, that's what it can feel like at times. But if you're doing it right, this is what it's really like. And it's a well-timed, it's like conducting an orchestra, and it's a well-timed, well laid out, well thought out plan. And you've got the team in place to do that. So, questions? Fantastic. Thank you. Wait. Okay.
While you guys are thinking, I just want to add that John is going to spend 2 hours working with our principals tomorrow morning, helping them. They're really on fire with the Twitter.
You guys have done something that I've not. They have unified the brand on their social media presence so that it's exactly consistent between all your schools on all the platforms. I don't know of another school district that's done that yet. That's going to help in communicating consistently on all those platforms significantly. So anyway, spent a lot of time working on that summer, getting this all kind of cleaned up and ready to go. I think it'll be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to the principals meeting tomorrow. Anybody have questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I agree. I think the what, the why, that's all intuitive. I think we see that every day. It's the how that is a little bit more, for me, a little more elusive to say, okay, how do we start? How do we get this going? How do we make those connections? So I was hoping maybe you could share some examples of what has been done, other school districts, how they got started.
So that's a good 30-minute discussion. And I'll try to make it brief. So, and they've got this, and we're going to start working on that this fall. There's some strategies that you can use to integrate email to ask people to go out and like and share content. So you can use the thing that a lot of people think about when they think about technology is I have social media in this silo, I have a website in this silo, I have email in this silo, I have a backpack, note home in the backpack in this silo. And the trick is you got to break down all the walls of the silo. So the way that you really drive launching those things is, first of all, being strategic about what it is you're choosing to put on in social media platforms, and second of all, then integrating all those technologies to use them to drive awareness of the other. So you use email to drive awareness of social media, just like you use social media to drive awareness of the website. Does that answer your question? Without the 30-minute dissertation on it. And
Thank you.
if you want, I can send you. Malia's got some examples in the folders that I've shared with her, so
Perfect.
she can give those to you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
So how do you measure engagement? I mean, I understand how you do it with a particular post or an artifact that goes up there, but I mean, overall, like goals for the program, and how do we know whether we're achieving them?
So a lot of people will use the metrics of the social media platforms to declare success. I don't like that metric. I work with a lot of school districts on ballot initiatives, which are very different than what we're talking about doing with the school district. On a ballot initiative, people have got to show up at a specific time on a date. You got to get them to take 20 minutes out of their day. So at the end of the day, what I prefer is to think about the real life things that you're trying to achieve. So numbers of people in attendance at a community engagement meeting, maybe awareness on a public opinion research survey of budget squeeze issues or facilities needs. So in other words, find out what your business objectives are and what you want those to be measured, and then we'll measure success based on how we're achieving those goals. As opposed to saying, oh, we've got 20% engagement on all our Facebook posts, yay, yay, yay. For me, that's irrelevant. I want to see the results happen in the operation.
Now you sound like my social media department. Hey, these stats of how many likes their post got, and I said, did they buy a ticket?
That's it.
But that would be something interesting on an ongoing basis within these meetings to talk about engagement, and kind of against the backdrop of, this is all really good stuff, you're on point, but how it's driving success within opinion, within people showing up, and linking that back to maybe some of the things that we did to highlight some of the work your department's doing around that. I think that would be great to highlight.
And John, that's what Chris, your conversation here with Chris, that's what you really mean by data drives the bus, right?
You use data. You use the data and the analytics of the social media to guide you on how you're performing on social media. But ultimately, I'm a business operations guy, right? So I care about, do we achieve the business objectives or not? Or the operational objectives maybe is a more appropriate way to say it with the school district. And so you let the data drive how you're doing on social media. But ultimately, in looking at the results, you need to have metrics that go beyond just the social media platform to tell you if it's working or not. You know, if you're getting the metrics outside the social media platforms and hitting those metrics that you want to hit.
So yeah, and linking it once again to what Margaret was saying is the whys, because that's really the key of what we're doing, but why we're doing what we're doing. I guess that, I mean, it sounds as though that's what we're trying to do with this.
Right.
And I think that that's important, and I just want to make sure that that's highlighted. I guess the second piece, and you may have touched upon it, but we've got all the schools that have their own social media, which is wonderful, and their own messaging and all the, the activity that's going on there, the great things that are going on at their schools. And then we've got the district piece. So did I understand what you said earlier in the presentation, that there's just going to be more linkage throughout the district, even to the school level, with some of these higher level, this is what the district's doing, this is what's happening in these schools, and the whys behind it. So there's that consistent message as well as the unique messages from each school.
Yes. So the schools will each have their own content that they're sharing that are specific, but we want it to be underneath the umbrella of the theme and message of the school district. So everybody's sort of reinforcing similar concepts. So they're all working in lockstep, right? So for example, the high school will be sharing maybe professional development stuff that the high school is doing, but everybody's going to be sharing professional development stuff at different times. Does that make
Thank
sense?
you. It does,
Okay, all right.
and that's great.
Okay.
It's all about, the schools are doing their thing, but it's also the linkage and the unit
Exactly.
district, and, what we're doing across the district, and
Right.
how we are working for every student.
Yep. You got it.
And that's why the naming convention was so important, and I do want to take a minute to thank Kathy Schrader, because she worked really hard this summer to make sure this was all set up. So we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Instagram, and we're going to have YouTube. And again, the naming convention is uniform all the way across, which really helps so much with getting that recognition for what we're doing as a whole.
That it? Okay, great. Thank you very much. Uh-huh.
Okay, Chris?
All right, we're going to recap the financial year from July 1st, 2016 to June 30th, 2017. This report is on the cash basis, where when the auditors come back in December or so, they will be on the modified accrual basis, so the numbers will be different for that reason. But so we're going to start with the last page, as I like to cut to the chase, which is the fund balance statement that we have in our monthly financials. This is always page 5 in the monthly financial reports. But the year's financials finished extremely close to our budget. The budget had an estimated annual net surplus, meaning we had budgeted for revenues to exceed expenditures by $87,282. The actuals, we actually resulted in an annual operating net surplus of $139,446, which is in the far right-hand column there. But the operations and maintenance fund had a deficit. As you know, we made that large transfer to cover the last 2 summers' projects to the capital projects fund. And the transportation fund and IMRF fund also had deficits. But if we go to so the fund balance finished the year at 43.72% of expenditures. So next we will talk a little bit about revenues. Oh, we had the chart. Let me talk about the chart briefly. The red solid line is the current year expenditures. The dashed red line is the prior year expenditures. The solid black line is the current year revenues, and the dashed black line is the prior year revenues. So, but we like this chart because it illustrates, that we're 84% property taxes. They come in September and then again in June. So then from September all the way down through May is the fund balances go down every month as the expenditures continue steadily every month, and the revenues just kind of do that normal progression that happens every year. May is our cash flow low point. But if you could go down a little bit, Dave, just the other way.
Down to
Just the other way a little bit, so we could see the top. But you can see the black line and the red line. They finished the year very, very close. As I said, we had a surplus, so the black line actually is a tiny bit above the red line. You can't really see that, but the expenditures this year obviously increased faster than the revenue did, which so that's that chart. So next we will talk about revenues, and as I said, as we've talked about many times, the revenues is all about property taxes. 84% of our revenues, our operating revenues, is property taxes. The property taxes, the total revenues exceeded the budget by 2.5% or $2.9 million. That was largely due to our collections. Our June property tax collections were at 51.58%, where historically we've averaged about 48.5% or so. So last year, the June taxes were 50.47. This year, 51.58. So I don't know exactly why that has occurred, but there's definitely been a change in June property tax collections, and that from a cash basis standpoint causes some timing differences. So the fall taxes then end up being less because you collected more in June. So property taxes came in better than budget, but the state categorical grants, you can see that the change, the year-over-year change there is a 30% decrease. That was because we budgeted for 4 quarterly payments, we received 3. And so that is a reason the state funds were short. They were but the property tax collections really carried the revenues because they exceeded the revenue, on the budget more so than the state funding was short. So that is why revenues ended up being better than budget. The other thing in other local line is last year we had the TIF 1 surplus distribution in 2016. As you know, we did not get the TIF 1 surplus distribution in the current year, so that we had that change. So then, Dave, if we could go to expenditures. Expenditures increased over the prior year by 6.7%. The total operating expenditures exceeded the budget by $2.8 million. But as you know, we had the $2,730,000 transfer from the O&M fund to the capital projects fund that is in this line here where it says dues and fees and tuition. That was that is the biggest thing on the expenditures, but salaries were ended up being a 3.2% increase over the prior year, and benefits ended up being a 5% increase over the prior year overall. So that's really it that I wanted to talk about last year's financials. So do we have any questions on the 2016-17 financials?
I think what you're saying is that property taxes, just to distill it on down, the property tax recovery, shall we put it, outstripped additional expenditures. How much of that would you say is new growth, and how much of that would you say is just based on a better collection in that second installment?
It really was about the better collection. I had budgeted for new construction. I think it did. The new construction did exceed what I had budgeted for new construction, but this is primarily a timing unexpected timing difference. The collecting more in June than we expected.
And will that additional collection of second installment of this year's, or which is actually last year's, show up in some sort of rebound in that the next year's collection will be less in some way, or the
right,
next?
the September collection will be less than this year because we collected more in June.
That's the second installment,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. One more thing. One more thing
One
before
more
you go
question.
on. Fund balances for operating funds. 43 point, or is that all funds? 43.72, I'm sorry, I wrote it down and I didn't.
It
Operating.
was 43.42, I think, John.
And what, our policy is much lower. Our policy is for all funds, isn't that right?
No, our policy right now is 26% of the operating.
Okay. I know you explained it some time ago, but we know our policy probably needs to be changed. Because it looks to people, while that's still out there, like we're retaining a lot more money, and you explained it, and in some ways it just isn't reflective. What would you recommend as being a policy change that would allow us to better explain to the community why these numbers on July 1 should be at a certain percentage? How could we explain that better to the community?
Well, I think the rationale, well, there's a few things. The number one thing is that June 30th is the fund balance is a snapshot in time and that snapshot is occurring right after we got our June taxes in. So you get half of your revenues in June. They take a snapshot, and this is how much your fund balance is. Obviously, it's going to be higher because you just got in all your revenues. That's why every month we show that chart that shows that May 31st is our low point. How much money do you need at June 30th in order to have cash flow where you don't have to borrow at May 31st? So that's part of it. And 26% at the time we thought was enough to get us through May 31st. It might be a little bit short from what I've calculated now. It might be a little bit higher than that in order to make it May 31st. But the other reasons that you have fund balance is, you have all this uncertainty out there in the state and in the legislature, and to absorb some potential uncertainty before you have to make extreme budget cuts, if you have some fund balance to absorb negative financial changes, which we might not be able to avoid. So those, which, we've heard it many times about potential pension cost shift, redistributing state aid and categorical aid, potentially freezing property taxes, all these things that could hit us. If you have a little bit of extra fund balance, aside from just the amount to get you to May 31st without having to borrow, that's the other rationale for having fund balance.
I guess what I'm asking is what changes should we make to our policy about fund balance in terms of just, first of all, correcting that prior number no longer reflects that staying above zero with a little cushion approach. And secondly, to allow us to explain the reasons why we're going above what's in the policy as it is adjusted and articulating reasons. Is there something that we could do in policy to kind of do both those things?
The policy does talk about avoiding short-term borrowing. That is right in the fund balance policy, and that's the rationale that's right in your fund balance policy that says we have 26% because the board feels like we should not borrow in order to pay operating bills. That's part of the policy. As far as putting something in the policy that says we need a little extra fund balance in order to absorb future negative financial changes, that's going to be up to the board.
I just realized the absurdity of what I said, that we'd put something in the policy manual to communicate to anybody. Nobody reads the policy manuals, what it comes down to. And I think we just had a social media guy here. I don't know why I didn't take that lesson. We're supposed to be talking to the public with our reasons. We should probably make some fundamental change in the policy that supports a communication a little bit better to the community in terms of the reasons why we go above our fund balance policy whenever we change it or however we change it. So.
Okay, tentative budget. So again, we're going to cut to the chase. The budget right here shows operating revenues of $119,263,580 with operating expenditures of $122,335,041, which results in a net loss, or a net where expenditures exceeded revenues in this budget by $3,071,461, which results in fund balance as a percentage of expenditures going to 39.54%. So, saying that, why don't we go to the next page, Dave, on revenues. As we've said before, property taxes are 84%. Overall, this shows revenues are up 1.2%, over the prior year, and that is mainly driven by property taxes. The fall taxes, as we talked about, are going to be less because the June taxes were more, but that extension was based on the 0.7 CPI. The June tax collection will be based on the 2.1 CPI plus new construction. So that, and then in the state revenues, I did budget for 4 quarterly payments. That is, I think I struggle with that every year because we get 4, we get 5, we get 3. It's a hard thing to budget year after year, but we ended the year 2 behind. We've gotten one of those since the end of the year already. So we would need to collect the second one from last year and 2 more in order to get the 4 quarterly payments. The Senate Bill 1 estimate for the district has us with the hold harmless plus like $6,000. So it's really negligible. It's really a flat situation if the Senate Bill 1 does pass. So I budgeted it at a flat amount for state allocation, and like I said, I've put in there 4 quarterly payments. And so this budget has, as it seems similar to past years, 90% local, 7% state, and 3% federal. That's kind of been our pie chart for a while. 84% property taxes. So we go to the expenditures. We have salaries representing 63% of the operating expenditure budget, and benefits representing 14%. So we're at 77% salaries and benefits. The benefits, we are estimating a 7% increase in insurance. Salaries, we will talk about the staffing, but we are, like I said, 77% staffing. So the expenditures are overall increasing 4%, and that's mainly due to the salaries and benefits. We do have a transfer from the operations and maintenance fund, which is in this other line here, of $1.2 million for next summer's projects. That was the money that was supposed to have come from TIF 1 surplus distribution, which is now being transferred from the operations and maintenance fund to the capital projects fund. So why don't we go to the next, just real quick, that's the fund balance. We've talked about that before, 39.54%. And this shows that revenues were up 1.2%, expenditures are up 4%. So why don't we go to staffing, Dave? So this, we started position control back in 2011-12, where we were at 1,073 employees. Now we're at 1,141. But in this very right-hand column for 17-18 tentative budget, in the middle column is showing the change where we have an additional cabinet administrator position, So that's the increase in the top line there by one position. School administrators, this is actually kind of just a school administrators, that's just a reclassification where we moved the athletic director position from where we have director, we moved it up to school administrator because he became an assistant principal. The certified staff is up 17.95. We'll talk a little more about that. The interns, that's just a couple more interns at $9,000 each. The special education assistants are down 8. Then we have this line where it's ELL assistant. That's really just a move where we added some support for in-house school suspension. It probably doesn't really fit that category well. But then down at the bottom there, the two directors, one was the athletic director that we said became assistant principal. The other was the technology administrator that we had eliminated. She was instructional technology that we eliminated. That was that position, which kind of got added up top at the cabinet level, as was the replacement there. And then technology staff, we had positions become timesheet work. So that's what that is. Dave, can you go to the next changes in certified staff? Not this one. There's another. This shows the 17.95. The 17.95 increase in certified staff was 2.05 at the elementary level, 7.45 at the middle school level, and 8.45 at the high school level, adding to the additional 17.95. And then on the next page, this just shows the history of our certified staff. We had 615.3 back in 11-12. We now have 694.05. Over the 6 years, we've averaged an increase of 13 certified FTE per year. And just with our property taxes being 84% and limited to CPI and insurance increases, this trend of adding 13 certified staff is just not sustainable in the future, but that's where we're at right now.
Are you ready for questions?
I am.
Okay, I'll start. I have a couple. For the TIF payments, did we anticipate 2 or 3 at this point in time that haven't
Well,
been
we
paid?
would have gotten one in FY 16-17, and then we would have gotten another one in 17-18.
We got one a couple years ago. It was only about $130,000 or something like that.
120.
120. And then, so this was the second big one that we were supposed to get.
We should have gotten a big one in 16-17, and then another one in 17-18.
What are those two total?
They were about 1.3 million each. 2.6. I mean, those were estimates we were given.
Okay, and then maybe this is a question for Dave. When you're talking about the increase in FTE, the average of 13 FTE increased, 13 per year, and you're telling us it's not sustainable. So what are some of the things that we can do? Have we built capacity so that that number can now be less in future years, or what's the strategy for that?
I am pretty confident that special ed will be flat. I can't speak to ELL because there are some new state laws with exit criteria, and we're not sure how that's going to play out. General ed, I expect that we will go back down due to a variety of reasons. One is the second-year implementation of the middle school changes. The second is that the high school curriculum reorganization that involves science and sequencing of electives and more push-in services for ELL. A lot of those factors are going to result in need for less staff. Also, I think some of the reorganization of math in the district will lead to some reduction in staffing. We won't be hiring any more coaches. So those are some things I think. Then I think as we do some academic return on investment and we look at our long-term programming and we decide what are the best way to implement services in various different areas, I think there's a strong likelihood that we will also find some efficiencies there. And then I think one of the last areas would be that depending on what happens with the long-range plan for our facilities, we would have a chance to potentially gain some efficiencies in being able to balance class sizes and do some things differently there, depending how that shakes out. So I think that pending significant enrollment increases, I believe that we've crested and we will actually be going in the opposite direction. And in fact, really, we don't have a choice. So we're gonna have to find ways to do that. But I think that there are mechanisms available to us.
Anyone else have questions? Chris?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, math, trying to make it simpler. To John's point earlier about policy and fund balance, I mean, I think the answer is it's not 26%. It's probably closer to 30%. I think the fund balance low point in May of 2 years ago is 21.6. It's going to be, last year was 19. If you run a deficit of 3 million, that means it would be 16, right? Somewhere around there. Yeah. We know we've got $1.2 million. $1.2 million is bare bones transfer for the money the city confiscated from us and the children of Elmhurst that we have to use to fix potholes and keep roofs on buildings. But that's not everything we should be doing to our facilities, which should be probably at least $1.5 million, I think, if we use the rule of thumb correctly. So, I mean, you look at fund balance, it was 46.5%, down to 43.7%, down to 39.5%. It doesn't take much, not only is it running deficits that does it, it's a percentage of a number that grows. Last year, the percentage of expenses was 117 some odd $1 million was our expenses, and now it's 119 this year. So even if you saw last year, we broke even, but we lost significant points of fund balance because one of the numbers in the fraction grew. I think I've always in my mind wanted to make sure that we had runway for what the inevitability of what the state is going to do to us happens. And I don't think we can possibly carry enough fund balance to fix it. But I just hope that we have enough time to do this in a pragmatic and thought out way rather than slashing staff. And I just see this trend going away. I see the city piling on. There will be a point in time, if this trend continues, where we have to be cutting teachers. And I hope the city enjoys digging holes with that money while we fire teachers.
John?
Just to clearly state for the community what's going on. There's a 2004 agreement. The city says it's in compliance. We say they're not. They were supposed to release TIF 1 money as soon as they got even. They got even 2 years ago, made a small partial payment for the first year, and have missed 2 now. So we're moving forward with the deficit budget because the city of Elmhurst has decided not to release the TIF 1 funds as it promised to the community. And they say they're legally not required to do that, and we disagree. We think the agreement legally requires them to release everything once they got paid back. That's consistent with their promises of the time. They say the agreement lets them keep more than their fair share, and we disagree. They say the agreement lets them get another piece of cake after they've finished their cake. And we disagree. And they're eating our piece. But most troubling to this community is they think this agreement legally lets them break their promises to the community. The promises that they will value education on an equal footing with business incentives and subsidies. The promises they made to the community at the time were unambiguous. Don't read the summaries. Read the actual words. Read the agreement. Perhaps we can get that on the website. Read the front porch from 2004 and every annual update after that, up till 2013 when a new administration arrived and simply changed its mind about TIF. So this is why we're in deficit. But we're not going to let their irresponsibility in changing their minds about what's important in this community detract in any way from our mission to care for the education of the community. So we're going to take on financial risk, as Chris notes. But what we're really trying to do is protect what's really important here, the education system in Elmhurst that is succeeding. And we're going to take on financial risk because we feel the city of Elmhurst doesn't share the same sense of priority that we have, of the importance of education in this community. So I think it's important for the community to think about what's important, where its priorities lie, and not get caught up into wordsmithing. And if we can, I'd like to put those items on the website for us to make available for the community.
Anything else for the tentative budget? Okay, thanks, Chris. We have superintendent's consent agenda. Are there items that board members would like to remove from the consent agenda?
I'd like to remove item E, approval of district-wide Title I plan.
All right, I'd like to remove item F, please.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda items A, B, C, D? That's it, A, B, C, and D.
I move that we approve the superintendent's consent agenda items A, B, C, and D.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Moved by Karen, seconded by Chris. Roll call vote.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes, it's 7 ayes, no nays. The motion passes. Is there a motion for item E, approval of district-wide Title I plan?
I move that the Board of Education approve the district-wide Title I plan as presented.
Good.
I second the motion.
Moved by John, seconded by Karen. Is there discussion?
I just have a few thoughts about this because this is a real important issue, and then I'll ask Dr. Henderson to please chime in with more technical information. The reason we're approving a plan we haven't in the past is because the state changed the rule or the statute that says now a Title I plan has to be approved by the board. And before this, it was a hyper-technical issue that staff did through an iterative process with the state. And frankly, I'm grateful for the state making us do it this time, approve it this time, because we do so mindfully, intentionally, because this is a real important issue, and it's an important issue in this community as well. It's poverty. Title I is an anti-poverty program. It is one of the things we do to deal with poverty in this community. Now, one of the problems of poverty is its invisibility. Some of that is related to the stigma that comes with it. And part of it is unintentional by what we do. We talk about free and reduced lunch, and there's really no such thing as a free lunch here when we talk about Title I. It hardly is. Free and reduced lunch is the educational term for the federal poverty level. Just so you know what I'm talking about, family of 4, the poverty level is $24,600 per year. That's what the family of 4 has to live on at the poverty level or below. 14% of York, 1 in 7 of our York Dukes live in poverty. So go to a football game, 1 of every 7 kids is living in poverty. It's invisible, as I said. Our highest school, Fisher, has 59%, more than half of the kids, almost 2 in 3. And if you don't know how poverty affects a kid in his or her school day, well, there's a lot of resources in this community that can help you find out. Just talk to some of our great professionals. Jane Bailey, Susan Condrat, many, many professionals in this community. But if you're looking more for data, there's quite a bit of research on how poverty affects educational outcomes. Mary, I'm sure you can fill people in, direct people to the research that shows a variety of issues, from nutritional and developmental issues, language and vocabulary issues, executive function skills. The academic research is pretty clear. So I think it's important that we understand this important program. And a key point of that is the earlier the intervention, the better. And Madison has done great things to address issues of poverty as they affect the educational system. So we need to know how this works. If we're going to be a public school and live our belief statement that all students must grow and learn, and all means all, and we did change can learn to must learn, and that's key. We need to know how this works, what it can do, what it can't do, and what we can do to make sure this resource and the other resources we have work better, including supplementing them when necessary. So, Mary, if you could you please tell us about the qualifications for funding, including the difference between targeted assistance and school-wide programs, and some of the programs that we fund with this money?
Sure, and just to add a little bit to your statistics, you talked about the 14% of students at York living below the poverty line. That's doubled the number of students in the last 10 years. At Fisher, we've had a 500% increase in students living in poverty in the last 10 years and a 300% increase at Churchville. So it's an issue that continues to grow. And while the need continues to grow, we're looking at decreased funding. Right now, the projections are that we'll receive about 50% less in Title I funding this year from the government. So it's a significant issue. Some of the things that first to talk about targeted versus school-wide assistance. So Fisher is our only school in the district that qualifies for school-wide assistance. School-wide assistance is provided to schools who have 40% of their students living in poverty or higher. So Fisher qualifies for that. Our other schools qualify for targeted assistance. So that's when it's below 40%. And targeted assistance, in order to determine who really benefits from those Title I funds, you have to really determine who are your most academically at-risk students. So it may not be a child living in poverty, that's how you qualify for funding, but schools who receive targeted assistance, it's really about those kids who are most academically at risk. And schools and districts identify those measures. At Fisher, where they're school-wide, they can really use Title I funding for school-wide improvement. So it gives them a little bit more freedom in terms of what they are able to do. For example, you'll see an increased number of tech devices at Fisher that were supplemented with Title I funds in order to personalize education, look for ways to engage kids. That's one thing that Title I funding has done. In each of our schools that have Title I support, we have parent liaisons. That's a critical piece of the support we provide for families. It helps break down some of the barriers between home and school, whether it's supporting families who aren't familiar with a U.S. educational system or are experiencing significant obstacles that prevent them from being actively engaged in their child's education. The parent liaisons are there to support that and help break down those barriers. Our summer school programs at each of these schools is funded by Title I. Those of you who are able to go out to Fisher, and you heard Jane when she talked about the program, that's fully funded by Title I. It's a critical piece of continuing the academic development of our students. The transportation cost goes into that, the resources, the staffing cost. So it's a significant impact on our Title I funding, and a real concern for me when I look at the decrease in our funds. So those are some of the really big pieces. With any type of title funding, you are supplementing what our Ed Fund does. You can't supplant. So, for example, when we bought ELA resources for all of our schools last year, we couldn't say, well, we have some Title I schools, so we'll use Title I funding to pay for their resources. You can't do that. You have to use your title funding for additional support to support those kids at risk.
So to clarify, Mary, when you said that the funding is being reduced, that's at the federal level, not the state. And to just make sure that it's clear, is that we will offer the services to students even though, there is that expense and we cover that, but then there's the supplanting is what you...
Yes, we do cover those expenses, and right now I'll be working with the principals and their leadership teams to really look at the things we have done with our Title I funding, look at the data and determine what has had the most positive impact on students. So that if we really do not get any additional funding from what they've projected, that we can make sure we're getting the best quality support for the kids.
One thing I would add to that is it gets compounded in the old funding formula anyway with the state, and who knows what's going to happen. We got, districts like ours would get categorical funding is what they called it for things like transportation and special ed reimbursements. And when they don't make those categorical payments, we're still required by law to provide those services. And the percentage of federal and state money that has gone toward reimbursing districts is continuing to get less. And so, and yet, in many cases, we have no choice but to provide, and not that it isn't the right thing to do in a lot of cases is not the point, but the fact is that we don't necessarily have the flexibility in some cases, and we're not getting reimbursed a lot of times.
Well, and it actually hits on the previous conversation and what Chris and John were highlighting. You know, we're responsible for a good education, and we've committed to the community that we will move forward as they have requested, and our employees have requested, to be that national leader. At the same time, you know, the city is not meeting its commitments and obligations and promises. The state is looking closer and closer to taking multi-million dollars away. And the federal government is saying they're supporting education, and yet the funds are decreasing. So that's just where we are. It's important for everyone to know. And we keep moving forward to help everyone understand how and why we are trying to improve the education here in this community for our students and for our community and their tax dollar returns.
I would also add that one of the major issues with Governor Rauner's mandatory veto is the inclusion of TIF property into the local EAV for the purpose of calculating school funding formula. That is a debacle, because obviously when a TIF is frozen for 23 years and we don't see any increase in that, you include that in the funding formula, it has a real impact on your state aid. And it disperses the tax burden even more so onto property, homeowners. So that's a big problem.
Any other comments? Okay, go ahead.
You can do a voice vote on this since it was pulled off.
Okay. So this is item E, approval of district-wide Title I plan. Be a voice vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, that motion passes. Item F, approval of retirement agreement. Is there a motion?
I move that the Board of Education approve the retirement agreement that was added to the agenda on the 18th of August.
And I second the motion.
Okay, moved by Jim, second by Karen. Any discussion? Go ahead.
I pulled this because I just wanted to express my very strong support for it. The person who's retiring, unfortunately for the district, is Malia Smith. Malia plans to retire at the end of this school year. And I just wanted to comment because I think I have a perspective from being on the board. I joined the Board of Education about 8.5 years ago. The district hired Malia 7 years ago. So I've seen the district before Malia and after Malia. When I joined the board, I witnessed a school board and an administration that was constantly battling community skepticism, which was brought upon by community misperception of what the school board was doing and what their aims were. I witnessed administration and school board that spent their energy combating this misperception and trying to correct it instead of spending all of its energy moving forward. I think Malia and her department under her leadership has taken us from maybe one of the worst school districts in terms of communicating with our constituency and our taxpayers to one of the very best. As an example of that, and I think in May I'll come back and give some better examples, but as an example, under Malia's leadership, she designed a website for us that we didn't have before. That website was awarded as the most transparent governmental website in DuPage County. She implemented Talk 205. She coordinated communication between principals and parents, administration, and teachers and students. And that improved communication has allowed the board, has allowed the administration to move the district forward. When Malia came here, our high school was ranked number 60 in Illinois. Because the improved communication has allowed us to move forward, today, depending upon what ranking you look at, our district, our high school is ranked number 14. Our district is one of the 9 best in the state. Sorry, give me a second here. I just want to summarize by saying, but I think parents' comments to me sums up Malia's contribution the best. And that parent said, today, if you don't know what's going on in District 205, it's your fault. It's because you haven't spent the effort, because all the information is there. I'm very sad to see Malia retire. She has been a huge impact. She's made a huge impact on the district. And I'll bring this up again in May, and I promise that I'll do a better job with my comments and being a little more specific about the specific programs that Malia has initiated that's allowed us as a district to move forward.
Thank you, Jim, very much. I'm very grateful. I've had a lot of great material to work with here, but I really have to say that you're giving me far too much credit, and I again want to credit my team of Debbie Holstein and Kathy Schrader. We worked together for 7 years, and we have worked very well as a team, and I'm so grateful for their help because I could never have done what it is we've accomplished without that. So thank you.
I had one more thing. In addition to all the great projects, I want to comment on your personal skills, which are outstanding. The community trusts your work. They trust you. You're open and honest, and that's hard to come by, all those great personal qualities. Thank you. Okay. Go ahead.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes, it's 7 ayes, no nays. That motion passes. Superintendent's action items.
Okay, there are 2. The first is approval of a donation. Elmhurst Airborne Travel Basketball is offering to donate $1,498.13 to the girls' basketball program. This would go toward the cost of varsity uniforms and shooting shirts. So we would recommend acceptance of that gift.
I'll motion that the Board of Education approve acceptance of the donation from the Elmhurst Airborne Travel Basketball Program in the amount of $1,498.13. This donation is accepted in accordance with Policy 880, gifts to the district.
I'll second.
Okay, moved and then seconded by John. I'd like to thank Elmhurst Airborne. They do a lot for our community. A lot of our students are involved in Elmhurst Airborne. It's been a program that's been around for a long time. So thank you so much for the donation, and we really appreciate it.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes.
Dr. Harrell?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
7 ayes, no nays. That motion passes.
Second one's a little bit different than a traditional donation. It's actually more of an agreement that we are recommending you approve between the Elmhurst swim team and the district. And they are offering to donate starting blocks in the amount of $23,348.70. We are told that our starting blocks are 2 generations removed from what is currently on the market. And so even though we do technically meet IHSA standards, still we are a little bit behind the times. So in exchange for helping us out with that, they have asked that we lock in their rent for the use of the facility for the next 5 years. Chris has done some work on this for a couple months, and we think that this makes sense, so we would recommend that you approve that.
Sure, I move that the Board of Education approve the donation agreement with the Elmhurst swim team for a donation in the amount of $23,348.70 in exchange for a 5-year freeze on their facility rental usage fees and staff charges.
Second?
Moved by Chris, seconded by Margaret. Go ahead.
First off, I'd like to thank Elmhurst swim team for their generous offer and their generous donation. I think the 5-year freeze, it doesn't even come close to adding up to the amount that they're giving us. And I think it's important to point out that this is a unique. It's more of an agreement than a donation. I think, as my counsel pointed out. What makes this unique, though, is that these blocks, my understanding from discussing, I have a couple of swimmers in the family that my kids, and in order to host IHSA events in the future, at some point, we're going to be required to have these blocks, conference meets. The competitive nature of what this is an expense that the district was going to be required to spend in the near future. So it's not necessarily a nice to have thing, which I think impacted the way that this donation was structured. So I just wanted to make sure that we explain why there's a freeze here and there's not freezes in other situations. This is a unique one. It's money that the district was going to end up having to spend, again, is more of a need or a requirement than a want to remain competitive within the conference.
Mr. Bloom,
Yes.
Dr. Harrell,
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. McDonough,
Yes.
Mrs. Caforio,
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner.
Yes, it's 7 ayes, no nays. That motion passes. Go ahead, freedom of information.
So we received 3 Freedom of Information Act requests, or 4 actually, I apologize. 2 requesting specific RFP information, which was granted, 1 requesting specific employee salaries, which was granted, and 1 requesting information not intended for our district, which was denied. They meant to send it somewhere else. Then I just wanted to make 2 announcements. One, which is on the agenda, which is that we recently learned of the U.S. News and World Report ranking, which has York as the 18th top high school in the district and the 687th top high school in the nation. I want to just indicate that when you see these rankings, you have to be a little bit careful. A lot of times they will measure narrowly defined criteria that only tell a certain part of the story. So I think that York is better than the 18th best high school in the state of Illinois. But these metrics for U.S. News and World Report take a look at proficiency rates in reading and math compared to the state average, and then proficiency rates in reading and math for minority students and economically disadvantaged students as compared to the state average, and graduation rate, and then AP participation and performance. And in this particular case, again, one of the things I want to point out is that the data is often several years old by the time they compile everything from the federal government and things like that. So this data is actually based on 2014-15 AP participation, for example, which ours has improved since then, and also some of these older rankings, when the PARC was the state test, will include the PARC as opposed to the ACT or the SAT, which is problematic for us from a comparison standpoint because we chose to test freshmen in algebra, other in math, and in other districts they chose to test different groups of people, which you were allowed to do, which means that we weren't necessarily testing our top performing math students as was measured on that test. So not that it's not a great thing and not that it doesn't tell you something, but I just think you always have to keep things in perspective with those kinds of numbers. The second thing is I just received in the mail today, so that we scanned this into your packet, but it wasn't on the agenda. The Elmhurst School District, the niche ratings have us ranked as the 8th best school district in Illinois. So that's the highest we've been since I've been here. Some of the methodology with niche is questionable and includes a lot of perceptual information. There's not a lot of controls into some of the things that go into it. However, I would rather be 8th than 9th. So, good news is good news. So.
I think with the niche ratings, there's some self-rating with asking community members, right? So it's not all hard data.
Well, people that like to go on the site submit stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, and they do, I have how they do this here, and they've got a bunch of different categories, and it's different components for each one. Too complicated for now, but the methodology is a little suspect, but again, it does tell us that we are doing some things well, and it's good news, so.
Any comments?
Let's stay with KPI.
Our own goals, right. Okay, board communications. Anything from the board members tonight?
Real quick.
Okay.
I attended the SACID meeting as our representative for SACID. It was the budget meeting. Approved the budget for 2017, 2018. There's not a lot of discretion there, mostly paying pursuant to approved labor agreements, and there's pass-throughs. There was a net reduction of students, and since some of that is on behalf payments, that just naturally brings the budget down. They reserved 1% of certified salaries for a possible pension shift. And net, taking out these two big movable items, that left a 2.2% reduction in expenses and a 3% reduction in revenues. Last year was a deficit. This year is balanced. How that plays out is that this helps establish the tuition cost for SACID services. Did I get that right, Dr. Kostick? Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other updates? No? Okay. We have 3 upcoming Board of Education meetings, September 12th, September 26th, and October 10th, 2017 are all Board of Education meetings in this room. We've reached the end of the agenda. I'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks.